Hey guys, our History Kid, and today we're going to be talking about a special event in Chinese history, which actually isn't even part of their history. The Tiananmen Square massacre was an event whenever several protesters went to memorialize a man who had died in Chinese government, but that whole thing led to protest, and the protest led to revolt, and that led to the Chinese government sending in the army and massacring several Chinese students. This event was a lot like the fall of the Berlin Wall, Hungarian Revolution, and the Soviet 1991 coup d'etat, as it all showed that communism was starting to breathe its last breaths across the world. Of course, we can see that communist China is still around today, as it quickly suppressed opposition and created a totalitarian state that still lasts today for some reason. And of course, China would just kind of sweep this whole massacre under the carpet and censor it, just like it never happened, because it didn't. But what if this whole protest led to the complete collapse of communist China? That's the question we'll be asking today. This whole scenario begins whenever the protests break out and call for free speech. Of course, in this timeline, instead of the tanks siding with the government and firing at the crowds, the army would then side with the people, instead turning against the government, calling for free speech as well. Why would this happen? I don't know. Let's just say it happens so the scenario can happen. Of course, being a dictator of a country and having your capital in active rebellion isn't the best situation. Of course, the eastern cities and industrial centers would get wind of this and start rebelling as well, asking for better workers' rights. And as if the situation couldn't get worse, the Tibetans that were just invaded decided to start rebelling as well. Of course, with Taiwan backing these new rebels, the Chinese government would just decide to surrender and begin to cut up its country along ethnic lines, creating new states. Taiwan would be annexed to the new Republic of China, and this would begin to start a mass panic in the communist countries that were still standing. We would most likely see a lot of uprisings and a more early coup d'etat in the Soviet Union, which would lead to a more early dissolution of the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, North Korea would be completely screwed over, as it would start losing military and economic backing from China, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, it would lose military and economic backing from Russia, which, is bad. But then, as if things couldn't get worse, in 2001, they'd be placed along the axis of evil. Of course, North Korea would begin to act out after this and begin to spawn communist rebellions in China, South Korea, and Russia, which would most likely lead to, them getting blamed for it, which they were responsible. Of course, this would see North Korea placed on a list of, hey, let's invade these guys because we think they're terrorists, and they would get invaded on all sides by several countries. This would lead to the map of China looking radically different from how it does in our timeline. We might even see a Putin-like president rise in China, being built on building up the military and trying to gain back its greatness that it once had as a communist nation and even as an empire. This leader's whole regime would be built on the nationality of the Chinese people and would actually most likely see that China doesn't give loans to literally every single African and Central Asian country. But instead, he would actually look to reunite all Chinese people within the borders and out of the borders, seeing parts of Central Asia, most likely the Zhejiang province, holding a lot of Chinese minorities, causing them to, invade in order to reunite them into their nation. Of course, this would anger a lot of people, as this annexation would be a lot like the Crimea incident in our timeline, where Russia would annex Crimea illegally. This would anger countries like Kazakhstan, as they just made an ally of the country that they invaded. And this would actually bring Russia into the conflict, making Russia hate China, as China had just invaded one of their allies, making China look good for America to walk in and just say, hey, let's be friends against Russia. Of course, siding with America after being heavily nationalist wouldn't make any sense for China. Instead, they would most likely create their own alliance of Asian nations such as Mongolia, Tibet, and Vietnam. And they would most likely give up all their claims to Indian land for alliance against American-backed Pakistan. Of course, this new world wouldn't see the creation of BRICS or a lot of other organizations, but instead newer ones. But that's where I'm going to end off the scenario today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like if you liked the video, comment if you want to see me do a scenario you thought of, or if you have any ideas on how the scenario could have gone any differently, and subscribe if you like the content. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.